Pletivorum cora fidelium et tui amoris igneis ignem accende emite spiritum tuum creabuntur
et renovatis passion terrae.
Oremus Deus cora fidelium sancti spiritus illustratione docuisti da nobis in iodem spiritu recta sapere et eius semper consolatione gaudere per Christum Dominum nostrum.
Amen.
Sede sapientiae
Ora pro
Nomine
nobis.
Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. So we're on the dogmatic fact. We're on 36.7. So the meaning intended by the author of a book. Since infallibility is extended to the meaning intended by the author of a certain book, as Innocent X, Alexander VII, and Clement XI decreed in the above-mentioned acts against the Jansenists, I will explain in advance how many meanings there are. See, so the point is that the Church cannot adequately defend the truth against error unless it is infallible in determining what is meant in the book. See? That's the point against the Jansenists. And this has an application to Vatican II. So there is a meaning which is said to be merely subjectively intended, which remains in the mind of the author concerning this. Since it is merely internal, the Church makes no judgment. So you don't know what a person's mind is. There is the meaning which is objectively intended, which the words contain, if the author, knowing the meaning of the words, sincerely spoke. If that's not true, then we can't speak to each other. If our words have no objective value, then we might as well just keep quiet, because nobody knows what anybody else is saying. See, I mean, this is common sense. So, concerning this sense, the Church judges the objective sense. The Jansenists, lest they be forced to obey, made a distinction between the sensus quis and the sensus qualis. The sensus quis, or grammatical meaning, is the natural meaning of any proposition. The sensus qualis is the quality of the proposition, for example, whether it is true or false. They say that the Church can err in the first type, but not in the second. You see, so the Church can err as to what the proposition means, but it cannot err in deciding what is true and false. That's the Jansenist position. They say that, Jacob Fouillon, there you go, Fouillon, the Belgian author of the book which entitled Via Pacis. That's what he said. But how would the Church be able to judge the quality of the proposition if it does not know the natural sense of the words? I mean, this is pretty basic. I will not even comment on another frivolous distinction by which infallibility is recognized for shorter texts, but not for longer ones. This is your author speaking. These things having been said, it is proved even against the followers of Hermès, that's how you say that in French, who repeated the distinctions of Jansenism, that the Church cannot err in judging not whether this or that man wrote a particular book, but what is the true meaning of a certain book. But this infallibility in dogmatic facts is a truth which is at least theologically certain. But others, such as Báñez, the great Dominican theologian and enemy of Molina, all right? The Báñez was the one that elaborated the Dominican and Thomist theories of efficacious grace against Molina. All right? So Báñez and Molina, those are your big names. All right? He calls the denial of this infallibility heresy. So sometimes you do get various labels from various theologians on the quality of a declaration or some sort of idea, whether it's merely an error or whether it's heresy. Heresy means it's contrary to faith. Error means that it's just wrong, but not contrary to faith. Dogmatic facts are the object of infallibility. Argument 1, infallibility in dogmatic facts is infallibility concerning the signs by which the quaestio juris, or doctrine, is expressed. But the Church judges infallibly concerning the signs by which doctrine is expressed, for it follows that the Church cannot err in dogmatic facts. For this it follows. The major is evident, for to judge concerning the sense of some book is the same as to judge concerning the words, which are signs of concepts, representations of concepts expressed in the book. And again, if you say that words do not express concepts, then we should all just not talk. We should just look at each other. See, so I mean, you're attacking the very notion of communication here. If you say that you can say something in print, but it doesn't really mean what it says. It's really basic. So from the very nature of speaking, for men cannot be taught the truth, and the truth cannot be proposed by using merely a word of the mind, verba mentis. We don't communicate as angels do by just, mentally. But a word of the mouth or signs must be used. B, from the impossibility of proposing infallibly the orthodox doctrine. For if it were possible that the Church could err in the fact and in the sense of the words, then it would be possible that the faithful would be obliged to believe that a heretical proposition is orthodox. See, so, I mean, if the sentence does not mean what it says. C, from the impossibility of rejecting infallibly heretical propositions, for once the decision of the Church is made, there would be left to those who say that the Church can err in the meaning of the words a legitimate reason for rejecting the teaching of the Church. See, so if you take the doctrine in a certain way, then you say, well, I reject that because, this is the way I take it. And you totally destroy the objectivity of language then. So the history of Jansenism is an argument in favor of this very thing. Now look at the footnote. Likewise, one cannot give to the documents of Vatican II an interpretation which differs from the actual words. The only authentic interpreter of any ecclesiastical document is the authority of the Church, namely the Roman Pontiff. Bergoglio said on January 30th, 2021, you can be with the Church and therefore follow the council, or you cannot follow the council or interpret it in your own way as you want, and you are not with the Church. And he's right. He also said there is no place in the Church for those who do not accept the council. That's what Bergoglio said. But the SSPX position of interpreting the council in light of tradition is not valid in the eyes of the person whom they regard as the Pope. That doesn't bother them, though. So it says what it says. And if language is incapable of saying what it's saying, then you might as well throw everything out, all the Denzingers, just throw them in the garbage. And we'll count on our own interpretations. I mean, they like to say that the document on religious liberty merely means that you don't force anybody to become a Catholic. It doesn't say In other words, that's not all it says. It does say that too, but the point of it is that you have the right to believe whatever religion you please. And not only that, but you have the right to establish seminaries and houses of study and places of worship, etc. I mean, it is far beyond the idea of not forcing somebody to become a Catholic. The Catholic Church has always taught that the act of faith must be a free act of the will. So, you don't put a gun to somebody's head and say, become a Catholic. But that's the way they like to interpret it. And they, like to put spin on subsists in and so forth. So, but that was JP2. And interpreting the council in light of tradition. And that's when Archbishop Lefebvre, in 1980 or so, totally switched his position and decided to reconcile with the modernists. And that went on all during the 80s until finally, in 1988, he got from them the idea that they would appoint the bishops to be consecrated. And at the last minute, Ratzinger sent him a note saying, and you have to repudiate your errors. And that did it. So he canceled the whole deal. That was on May 6th, 1988. And then the person that was the vicar of Christ became the Antichrist over the next 2 months in order to prepare for the consecrations. So I think we're going to see a repeat of that sort of thing. I noticed they came out with a criticism of the documents, or the document of the Tucho, whatever his name is, Tucho Fernandez, saying we shouldn't use co-redemptrix or mediatrix of all graces. And why pick on that when there's so many other things to be worrying about? I just don't understand it. Why? So anyway. So, all right, we said that. Argument 2: the church is in the function of teaching. Is infallible, but sacred scripture explicitly affirms that a dogmatic fact, that is, the sense of the words, pertains to this function of teaching. Ergo, proof of the minor. O Timothy, keep that which is committed to thy trust, avoiding the profane novelties of words and oppositions of knowledge falsely so called. Hold the form of sound words which thou hast heard of me in faith and in the love which is in Christ Jesus. But shun profane and vain babblings, for they grow much towards ungodliness, and their speech spreadeth like a canker. It means like a cancerous sore. The same apostle admonishes the superiors of the church of Ephesus, saying, and of your own selves shall arise men speaking perverse things, to draw away disciples after them. He says, let no one seduce you with empty words. Therefore the church infallibly both approves the word of truth and condemns the word of error. Argument 3 from tradition: the church does not err in judging what is the object of its infallibility. But the church has always held that the dogmatic facts are subject to its infallible judgment. This is evident from the facts. For A, the Council of Nicaea condemned the book of Arius, which was called Thaleia. The Council of Ephesus condemned the writings of Nestorius and approved the books of St. Cyril of Alexandria. The Second Council of Constantinople condemned the 3 chapters. The Council of Constance, approved in this matter by Martin V, ordered that each suspected person be interrogated whether he believes Wycliffe, etc., were heretics, and that their books and doctrines were and are perverse. The Fathers of Trent decreed that the canon of the Mass is so pure from every error that nothing is contained therein, which does not in the highest degree savor of a certain holiness and piety, and raise up unto God the minds of those that offer. The Roman pontiffs acted in the same way against the Jansenists, and the whole Church obeyed, for who would affirm that the Holy Ghost is against the whole Church, and that he favors only Jansenius? And now, the precise position of the SSPX is that it infallibly accepts or rejects the supposed teaching of the Church, according as, in the judgment of Menzingen, it is in accordance with tradition or not. In other words, they have the position of the Jansenists. Archbishop Lefebvre said you have to sift the magisterium for what is Catholic and not Catholic. Then who's the authority? The sifter. Their position is totally untenable from the point of view of Catholic theology. See, that's why Cardinal Journet, when asked about Econ, he said it's Port Royal sans intelligence. Does everyone know what Port Royal is? Port Royal. It was the convent or the monastery of the Jansenists. And he said it's Port Royal without intelligence, which was a devastating term, but he understood this, that they're making themselves the judges of the magisterium. So who would affirm that the Holy Ghost is against the whole Church and that he favors only Jansenius? The Universal Church has always believed that the creeds were made infallibly by the Church, that the use of certain terms are infallibly defined, such as homoousios against Arius, and that heretical formulas are infallibly condemned. But in these things, the notion of dogmatic facts is seen. In fact, if the thing is considered in its entirety, it does not seem to matter whether the texts by which the faith is exposed should be longer or shorter, or whether a heretical formula should be condemned in a book or not. All right, so objections. The judgment of the Church concerning facts is not infallible, but the meaning of a certain book is merely a fact, therefore proof of the minor. A mere fact is that which, for example, what Jansenius intends. The book's pages, syllables, and words are mere fact. Response. I distinguish the major. The judgment of the Church regarding particular facts is not infallible, I concede. Concerning dogmatic facts, I deny. So, yes, if the the Pope in an encyclical could make a mistake about some historical fact, but that's not a dogmatic fact. The meaning of some book is a mere fact in itself, I concede. Connected with a dogma, I deny. Proof of the minor. I distinguish what Jansenius intends subjectively and internally is a mere fact, I concede. Objectively and externally, I deny. What is judged by the Church is not the meaning which the author of the book had in his mind, but as Innocent XII declares, it is the obvious meaning which the very words carry. Because that's what everybody understands. Likewise, I distinguish that the words, etc., are a mere fact. Materially, I concede. Formally, I deny. Words are signs of concepts. However, the purpose of the Church, when it is judging a book, is not that it be believed that the condemned proposition is found in some book with as many words, but that the words expressing the error do not spread like a cancer. Instance, the infallibility of the Church is not extended beyond the doctrine of faith and morals, but the judgment concerning the meaning of a certain book pertains to grammarians. Response, I distinguish the major. Infallibility is not extended beyond the doctrine of faith and morals, and to those things which pertain to the proposition of this doctrine I concede. Only to aforesaid doctrine in the abstract I deny, and I distinguish the minor. The judgment concerning the meaning of a book pertains primarily to grammarians, I concede. Only to them I deny. God, when he granted to the church infallibility in teaching, doubtlessly gave to it the means necessary to this end. No one can judge concerning a doctrine or propose it unless he truly understands the words which express the doctrine. I mean, this is really basic common sense. If the church should err in dogmatic facts, infallibility in doctrine would nevertheless be preserved, but this is sufficient. Response: I distinguish the antecedent. Infallibility is preserved with regard to dogma in the abstract. Let it pass. That means we'll let that go for now. Practically, I deny. St. Thomas said, moreover, a man professes his faith by the words that he utters, since confession is an act of faith. Now, confession there means professing the faith. As stated above, wherefore, inordinate words about matters of faith may lead to corruption of the faith. So the church has always been very careful about how it expresses something. There was a tremendous fight over homoousios. I told you in the West, homoousios comes over as something different in Latin from what it is in ousia. It comes over as hypostasis, I'm sorry, comes over as substance, and substance means essence, and so in Greek, hypostasis means person. So there are three hypostases in Greek. That comes over as three substances or three essences in Latin. See, so there was a big fight about that, because when you transliterate, hupo is sub, stasis is stand, so substance. See, so that caused just figuring out what it meant in Latin, etc., caused a big problem. But in order to try to lure back the Arians, they wanted to say homoiousios. Homoios means similar. Homos means same. So of similar substance as the Father. And that was a big one. That was the Council of Rimini. And that was condemned to homoiousios. See, so the word means, is very, very important. You know, what words are used in the definitions. Very, very important. So it's, it's that. So, okay. Instance, in order that the church correctly function in its job of teaching, it is sufficient that it not err in those words and propositions by which it proposes the truth to the faithful. Therefore, infallibility in judging the meaning of some book is superfluous. Response, I distinguish the antecedent. The infallibility as it is proposed by the objector is sufficient for enunciating the truth. I concede. For the purpose of condemning error, I subdistinguish. In the abstract, let it pass. In the concrete, I deny. For an infallible judgment concerning the words, propositions, books by which the error is expressed and propagated is required in order to practically condemn error. It makes no difference, however, whether the error is promulgated in a book or in a little pamphlet. All right, so the point is that the church must be, in order to protect Catholic doctrine from corruption, must be infallible in assessing the meaning of what the error is stating. This is beating this with a stick, so to speak. It's beating it to death, or it's so much based in common sense that it's hardly worth talking about. But the Jansenists always wanted to wriggle out of, and that's wriggle, not wiggle. All right. Yes, do you know there's a difference between wriggle and wiggle? Worms wiggle. To wriggle, W-R, to wriggle your way out of something means to extricate. You probably don't know what that means. To free yourself from something in a, might say, improper or dishonest way. So the Jansenists were just trying to wriggle themselves out of the condemnation by saying, well, the Pope doesn't understand what we mean. So it's another thing for the grammar students. Objection to the infallibility of the church extends only to revealed things, but what is not revealed is that some book, for example, the work of the Jansenius, which is entitled Augustinus, contains erroneous doctrine. Therefore, the church can err with regard to dogmatic facts. Response: I deny the major. We have shown that infallibility extends as well to those things which are connected to revealed things in the manner already explained. I distinguish the minor. The fact of Jansenius's book is not revealed directly, I concede. Indirectly, I deny. The 5 propositions which are contrary to the errors of Jansenius are considered to be directly revealed, but the dogmatic fact that they are found in his book is considered to be indirectly revealed. For something pertains to faith indirectly and secondarily, as in the case of those things the denial of which would lead to the corruption of the faith. That's an important point. But if there is a disordered statement concerning those things which pertain to faith, there could follow from this a corruption of the faith. That's St. Thomas. So something can indirectly pertain to faith if it would corrupt the faith. So the proposition of the faith is not the only purpose of the church. The protection of the faith by condemnation of error is also essential to the church's mission. Therefore, the church to which the faith or revealed truth is committed as something to be guarded infallibly judges whether some statement, for example, of Jansenius, should be called a cancer and corruption of revealed truth or not. Instance, revealed things are considered to be the object of infallibility, as they are in themselves, and not as they are expressed in some book. But a dogmatic fact does not regard revealed things in themselves, but only in some book. Response: I distinguish the major with regard to the second part. As they are expressed in a certain book, materially I concede, formally I deny, and I distinguish the minor. A dogmatic fact regards revealed things in some book. Formally, I concede. Materially, I deny. The divine intellect knows all truths in an incomplex manner, but the human intellect knows even incomplex things in a complex manner. That is, it knows by composing and dividing. Therefore, on the part of the believer, the object of faith is something complex by way of a proposition. It is certain that the object, however, of faith and whatever things are connected with revealed things are not in the intellect alone, but are able to be pronounced by means of voice. And because, as St. Thomas testifies, if there is a disordered statement concerning those things which pertain to faith, there can follow from this a corruption of the faith. Does everyone know what LC means? Loco citato, that means in the place cited, in the last reference. All right. The church to which the deposit has been given to be guarded, without a doubt, judges infallibly concerning a particular enunciation of the faith. So, the objection 3 is concerning the 3 chapters. You have to know the history of the 3 chapters. It's very complex. I'm going to leave that to church history. All right, it's a very complex thing, and there's a book on the shelf, Parsons, who talks about it. He talks about the all of the controversial aspects of church history, and he mentions that it's so we're going to skip that because you'd have to understand the whole 3 chapters business. as you can see, it's a real doozy. But I do have a footnote in here. Where the footnote is. Oh, there it is. Nowhere do we read that the person of Theodore of Mopsuesta and his book were, at least directly, either approved or condemned by the judgment of the fathers of Chalcedon. Theodore, in the year 428, before the Nestorian controversy broke out, had died in external ecclesiastical communion. All right, so he was not. He died not excommunicated. It's an external ecclesiastical communion. And the footnote is, this is yet another case of someone who was publicly a heretic, but who was never legally condemned as such. So you can be publicly a heretic that puts you out of the church de facto, just as you can be a public murderer, but not de jure until the judgment comes and you're declared. It's very important to understand that distinction, because everybody mixes those two things up. So note the term external ecclesiastical communion. This fact, like that of Nestorius, supports the thesis of Bishop Gerard de Laurier. See, Nestorius was a public heretic in 428. He preached it from the pulpit that Mary was not the mother of God. On Christmas Day, nice sermon on Christmas Day, 428. He was not condemned as a heretic until 431. See, so de facto he was a heretic. The clergy of Constantinople said, we have an emperor but no bishop. So they repudiated him because of his de facto heresy. But when he came to Ephesus, he was given the place of honor as the Archbishop of Constantinople, because he was not yet deposed juridically. So that is an absolutely capital importance that you make those distinctions. And most of the error comes from not making those distinctions. Even Cardinal St. Robert Bellarmine, who said a pope falls from power by public heresy, he said, nonetheless, he still has to be deposed. In other words, there has to be a legal aspect, and most people don't read down the line that he says that. They say, oh, he falls from the papacy. But in other words, that there is a legal deposition that must take place before he actually legally falls. So there's a de facto fall, there's a de jure fall. Cajetan and John of St. Thomas say that it doesn't even fall, and this is just the personal sin of heresy. Personal sin of heresy. It doesn't fall until he's declared. So, but we're really not dealing with the personal sin of heresy. That's another point to make. We're dealing with someone teaching heresy. And that's a whole other thing. So you have to make all the proper distinctions. So you need to do in church history the whole business of the 3 chapters. So I'll skip all this. Although, let's see. Number 36.47. The 6th Ecumenical Council, Constantinople III in 680. In session 13, condemned the letter of Honorius, the Roman pontiff, to Sergius in this manner. So Sergius was the Archbishop of Constantinople, who said that there was only one will in Christ. That's known as monothelitism from the Greek. And in fact, there are 2 wills, the human and the divine. Right? So, this is what the Sixth Ecumenical Council said. Reconsidering the dogmatic epistles which were written to Sergius, once patriarch of this imperial city, which may God preserve, both to Cyrus, who was then the bishop of Phasis, and to Honorius, once pope of ancient Rome. Ancient Rome means real Rome, because Constantinople was the new Rome. Similarly, also the epistle from him, that is Honorius, written to the same Sergius, and finding them entirely different from the apostolic teachings and the definitions of the holy councils and of all reliable fathers, and following the false doctrines of the heretics, we in every way reject them and execrate them as noxious to the soul. But Catholic doctors think that there is an error contained in this judgment of the council regarding a dogmatic fact. Proof of the minor. Juan de Torquemada. There's two Torquemadas. One was a theologian. The other one was the head of the Inquisition in Spain. I forget his first name now. He said, Juan is the theologian, said concerning the condemnation of Honorius, it is believed that the Orientals did this by an evil and sinister information, having been deceived concerning the aforesaid Honorius. Bellarmine affirms that these fathers were deceived by false rumors, and not having understood the letters of Honorius incorrectly, number Honorius among the heretics. So Honorius is often brought up as an example of, a pope who was considered a heretic, but he didn't fall from papacy. And the response is, by the authority of a few doctors, nothing is concluded against the universal doctrine of the Church. I distinguish the major. The sentence of the council concerning Honorius was approved as it stands by the authority of the Roman pontiff. I deny that it was pronounced at a council before its approbation. I concede. You see, a council's actions have no value whatsoever unless they are approved by the Roman pontiff. So they could say anything. But if they're not approved and promulgated by the Roman pontiff, they're as good as zero. So much for collegiality. All right. Therefore, since there was no sentence ex cathedra, no argument can be made against infallibility in dogmatic facts. This was evident also to Juan of Torquemada, for he said he was not judged so, that is, as a heretic, either by the Apostolic See or by the Latin Fathers. But Leo II teaches that the sentence of the council must be understood in this sense, that Honorius sinned not by teaching, but by permitting and neglecting. So something like he fanned the flames of heresy by his neglect. That's what Saint Leo II said. See, if you read the letter of Honorius to Sergius, there's no heresy in it, but there's no serious condemnation in it either. It's a very fuzzy kind of thing, and you could. You can see how that accusation was correct about him. He should have blasted Sergius. So the popes are not exempt from imprudence. But he was not approving the doctrine of Nestorius. He was not. But even if he were, those were just letters to Sergius. I mean, they were not teaching of the church. It's a whole different, it's apples and oranges. We're talking about the teaching of the Catholic Church here, not whether, Leo is a personal heretic or not, or whether he wrote some letter or something like that. This is Vatican II. It's all the post-Vatican II teachings and practice, which manifest teachings, like Assisi and all of those things. But Leo is in Assisi, I think, today. See what happens. See if the Buddha goes up on the. So it doesn't. But it's good to study. Again, Parsons has a big thing on Honorius. It's good to study those because people bring those up, and you should have a quick answer. Torquemada seems to look at only the particular fact of the person of Honorius in which the church could err from an evil and sinister information concerning the aforesaid Honorius, especially when he defends the infallibility of the Roman pontiff with regard to the books of the doctors by approving some and condemning others. Bellarmine seems to have looked at the sentence of the council regarding the person of Honorius, not regarding his text. So, but you need to read up on that. All right, this is a big one now. Whether disciplinary matters are an object of infallibility, liturgy, etc., etc., etc. All right, we'll find out. And I gave you a supplementary thing on this. What did I do with it? Didn't I? It was in Latin. I thought I gave it to you. I'll find it. Oh, I think it's in my other book. Yeah. I thought I distributed that to you. The Infallibilitate, yes. So, disciplinary matters are those which, by the positive law of the Church, are prescribed or prohibited for the purpose of directing Christian worship and life. So positive law is distinguished against natural law. It means laws made by human beings. It's positive law. So it's the church's laws concerning worship and life. The extension of infallibility to discipline is more easily understood if we say a few things first. The principle must be considered on which the disciplinary law is based. The principle, however, is either general, and it is the very legislative power of the Church, which cannot be denied without denying the faith, obviously, or particular, namely that truth of faith or morals with which the disciplinary law is connected. For example, the precept of lay communion under one species of bread, which contains the truth of the real presence of Christ under each species. So some disciplines are manifestative of a doctrine. See, the Protestants said, well, you're not receiving the whole Eucharist if you don't receive the wine or the precious blood. And that's not true. You do. See, so there is a doctrine connected to that. So that's what the point he's making. And so most disciplines have doctrines connected to them. So it is evident, however, that disciplinary things precisely in a general or particular principle of this kind are immune from error. The disciplinary law is in itself general if something is prescribed for the whole church. It is particular if ordinances are made for one particular church or some particular churches, some dioceses. The thesis of the infallibility of the church regards only the universal discipline, so that's very important to understand. So something could be approved for a certain diocese that is wrong, but in other words, it's not the object of the church's infallibility in disciplinary matters. So you might have local feasts which are approved. That's why the Immaculate Conception was solemnly promulgated, because it was not universally accepted as a feast. It was only in certain dioceses that it was celebrated. If it had been universally celebrated, then it would not have been necessary to proclaim it, because a universal feast is considered ordinary universal magisterium. That's why mediatrix of all graces, that's a dogma, because Benedict XV approved that for the whole church. And if you look at the older books, May 31st is mediatrix of all graces. So to say, well, we shouldn't use mediatrix of all graces would be the same thing as saying we shouldn't say Christ is God. It's the same thing as saying that, because it's a dogma. But they probably don't even know this stuff. They just know sociology. Heal Me With Your Mouth. I think that's the name of his book. Yeah, that's the name of Tuczo's book. Or Tuczo might be a better, Tuczo. That's the name of his book. It's full of pornography. He's the head of the Holy Office. That's the state of the Catholic Church today. He apologized for his first book that had a lot of dirt in it. That doesn't change anything. I mean, a person who did that should go to a monastery and never be heard from again for the rest of his life. That's what should happen. But, well, he's from South America. He's in Argentina, right? Yeah, Tuczo. Yeah. Fernandez, Tuczo Fernandez. So anyway, the end of disciplinary laws is the holiness and order of the church. From this it is clear that laws which are merely disciplinary can be changed according to the necessity of times and places, but the church cannot, in a law of universal discipline, however much it is changed, prescribe or forbid something which is contrary to faith or morals. Very important. In other words, it can change its disciplines, but it cannot impose anything in those changes that are contrary to faith or morals. Very important point. B, since the proposition of the laws to the circumstances is a question of prudence, infallibility does not seem per se to demand that all the laws of the church attain the highest degree of prudence. So that means a pope could impose something which is imprudent. And that has happened many times in the history of the church. Well, for example, communion under both species was deemed imprudent because of spillage. It's the main reason why it was done away with. I think today they would do away with it. I mean, if this were a normal time, if they could somehow control the spillage, it's not sanitary. See, back in the early centuries, nobody knew about germs until about the late 19th century. The idea of germs, and you're communicating all kinds of diseases if people are going up to the chalice and drinking from the chalice. I mean, there's such a thing as backwash. It's true. See, and that would. So the church at an early age did away with both species. So you could say that there was a certain imprudence in doing it before because the church improved on it. So that means before there was a certain imprudence about it. See? So, but there were many things that were changed over time because they were just imprudent or didn't work out well. There were many permitted, at least by silence, many of the what they call the sequences in the Mass. And Trent did away with almost all of them. There were just too many, see, and every Sunday had a sequence, and so it's only 4 that survived, the big ones. So, it's just like pruning a garden, you might say, once in a while. The church does that. And things pop up, and there's practices here, there, and the other place. So the church is not exempt from imprudence in disciplines, but it is exempt from errors against faith or morals. All right, so that means disciplines can be revised and set aside for one reason or another, according to the prudence of the reigning pontiff. So just have to make that distinction. It doesn't mean necessarily that it's approving the best possible way in which to do something. I would say that applies to the 1955 Holy Week. In hindsight, that is seen as an imprudent thing to do. Incorporating changes that were designed by Bugnini. Make sure you pronounce that correctly. Bugnini. in hindsight, you see how that contributed ultimately to the new mass, etc. And it was praised as that by Paul VI. So it's just an imprudence. So that's why it makes sense to return to the pre-1955. So, but you couldn't say that it's against faith or morals. All right, take your break.
I have a question.